Hello and welcome everybody for today's webinar. Today we will talk about the data privacy trends in 2023, and hopefully we will inform you a little bit more about that. We will explain the market a little bit so that you potentially can expand your knowledge for that in 2024, 2025 a little bit, because one of the goals of this webinar is also that you will understand the basics of this market. And I'm very happy that I am not the only one here today. I'm here with Ben Humphrey. He has 25 years of experience across the European advertising technologies ecosystem. Before he worked for all the big companies, he worked for Microsoft. He led a European DSP and was formerly board director of IAB Europe, etc. And today, thank God, he's still talking to a lot of people inside of the industry because he's a consultant and he has two data-related businesses. Paul is working with me in the last 3 years since 2022. So very happy that he is here also. He's a product manager at Usercentrics. He's owning the area of data and analytics, and he's also quite an expert in the end of third-party technologies, but also in questions about server-side tagging and also the future of consent. So I'm happy that you're here, Paul.
Thank you very much, Simon.
Thank you. And before we go very much into the detail, I would like to quickly start to talk about our vision today. And our vision is to build a world where user privacy enables a thriving digital ecosystem. And as you can read here, it's two things. One is the user privacy, and the other one is the digital ecosystem. So the question is a little bit like in the song Love and Marriage. The question is, can one live without the other? And we actually say, no, that's not the case. And it's pretty much because privacy is in today's world a regulatory a requirement. So companies cannot circumvent privacy. They have to work with it, they have to live with it, and they have to go through it. And the other part, the digital ecosystems are also very important for all market participants, obviously, because end users want to have good recommendations. Companies want to sell products, obviously, and governments, they want to earn money. They also want to get taxes through all the money that is flowing through the digital ecosystems. So this vision actually should be discussed in many, many companies today. I know that a couple of companies are already discussing it, but this would be one sentence to discuss in all companies. And this is a map that at least I think is quite interesting, because especially this privacy part that we discussed in the vision before has a massively growing over the last years. So in 2018, we had GDPR in Europe, then we had CCPA 2020, also 2020 LGPD in Brazil, PIPL in China. So all the major markets are basically discussing about privacy and making it as a big requirement in the market. So there is no way around privacy anymore. And even especially if you think it about a little bit further, if you cannot go around it, then you have to bring it into your future, into your own vision. And this is not necessarily a bad thing if you think about how you can use privacy as a competitive advantage. Now, what you see here is an analyst of Gartner, Nada Hinein, and he says that companies have the option to get higher digital profits as one thing. So privacy can be a competitive advantage. And the other thing is that customers, if they trust you as a company, then they are willing to pay a premium. So pay a little bit more if they know that the data is basically best cared for. So it can also be the next big societal trend. But to understand all of this a little bit better, there is one fundamental big question behind all of that, and that is who is actually driving these markets. So who are creating the trends we will discuss today. And one is for sure the regulators. And for the regulators, it's quite interesting. Sometimes it's very complex to understand the requirements. I will give you an example. For example, the CNIL in France, it's the Data Protection Authority of France, and they have design requirements that nudging is not allowed, that the opt-out button, the deny button of a cookie banner needs to be as present as the opt-in button, for example. Yeah? Then you have the Garante in Italy, also a data protection authority there, and they prescribe, for example, that you need an X inside of the cookie banner so that end users can escape the cookie banner and freely browse afterwards. Next to that, also something that Ben will go a little bit more into detail is the industry-specific standard, more specifically talking about the IAB and the TCF 2.0 there. Next to the regulators, obviously, there are the tech players or the infrastructure providers, so all the big companies who essentially create the framework where we are all in. So basically, the mobile phones, the desktops, the browsers, etc. And they are creating for sure something like the privacy sandbox, which we will discuss a little bit at the end of third-party technologies, specific frameworks that tracking is harder in the future, etc. So also here, you have to be closely aligned with the changes there. And the last driver of this industry is obviously the end users and their trust. And this is also where we will start right now, the end user perspective. So this is, I started in this company in 2018. So the beginning of GDPR, and this is basically how I experienced the GDPR. So in the beginning, there was a lot of preparation and an educational stage, and companies were calling us, oh, we don't know how to implement a CMP. We don't know what the true requirements are, etc. So it was very, very tough to actually understand the GDPR, the requirements, etc. The next stage, disillusion stage, the CMPs or the cookie banners are then implemented, the new normal basically. And for sure, there was way less data. 30%, 40%, 60% less data for the companies. That's one thing. And the other thing is the end user track, which starts here. It's a bad user experience because the end user is not coming to a website to check the privacy status, for example, or to read the terms and conditions, etc. The end user wants to buy a pants or wants to read news, the weather outside, etc. But for sure, this cookie banner, for example, is not the thing to do in the internet or what the internet was created for. The third stage, the depression stage, this depression more from a company experience, because the companies then know that, oh, there is no turning back. This is the new normal. We have to accept that. We have to recover. We have to identify, reconstruct, and find ways to actually recreate our data set and recreate our data-driven business modeling. From an end-user perspective, it's more and more a lack of understanding and the requirement for trust. So who can I trust? What can I do? How can I actually understand what's happening in these markets? So we are now, I would say, a little bit between stage 3 and stage 4. That's one thing. But on the other side, we see the same history in other devices, for example, in the apps market, but also in other countries right now. For example, in Brazil, we see the same steps going through time after time after time. And this is basically the thing. So we can find a lot of papers and information about users' trust, how it's going, how it's eroding. Basically, as you can see here, 81% took action due to data privacy concerns in the past year. 40% deleting an app. This is actually for many companies. This is super bad, because no app means no data, means no money in the end. And it's actually, it kind of makes sense, because the world of privacy is so complex, because it inherits, or in there is one thing, is the legal requirements, so the legal perspective. There's also the tech perspective, and there is the marketing perspective. So we have 3 perspectives coming together into one area. And there are questions like, which privacy regulation counts for me? When I'm, for example, when I'm as a European citizen, when I'm in Japan, Is it then APPR in Japan? Is it GDPR from Europe? Where am I protected? How am I protected, etc.? Next question, why do some CMPs look different than others? More specifically, we are talking about the TCF 2.0 of publishers by the IAB, and they are looking a little bit different than the usual CMPs. Then we have thousands of MarTech solutions. So also here for the end user, it's obviously quite tough to understand what are they doing. I give you an example. In 2011, it was only, I think it was only 150 MarTech solutions, and that was growing and growing and growing and growing. And today we are having more and more, and especially I can promise you that with the end of third-party cookies, we will see even more and more and more in that area. And then last but not least, there are a lot of words in the markets, topics, ITP, ETP, which is browser protocols, Schrems 2, which is about data transfer. So it's very easy to lose track. And for companies, the question is now, how can they make sure to provide transparency and clarity for customers and potentially also end users? And this is even more, a lot of studies and essays that I quickly want to show you. You can ask after the webinar for the links, etc., and can read it for your own. But long story short, it's about the requirement of trust, the need for control. And if all of this happens in the end, then the end users will provide data if they understand what you are doing with the data and if they understand their own benefits to that. And one of the first questions is how to do that. In many discussions, we actually asked how to provide this, and then one of the first thoughts is actually, can full transparency help? Full transparency would be, you're coming to a website and this is a picture of programmatic advertising. Then potentially there's an advertiser who spends money to an agency, and then it's going through the whole process, which is super complex. And if the end user sees that as a first thing on the website, the end user potentially will be bored, confused, and might bounce. So this is not the best way to do that. Try to do it as clear as possible. And when the end user wants to understand more, then obviously bring more information into it. Because, I mean, in the end, you can never provide 100% of transparency of what happens with the data anyway, but make sure that the end user understands a lot. And this is not the way to do it. But what is a potential way to do it, and I would like to give you two examples in here. One is the simplification of privacy, and it's not just Apple that is doing that, but they have a very good example here. When you're going into the App Store, and before you actually download the app, they will provide you a couple of information, which data is used to track you, which data is linked to you, and which data is aggregated but not linked to you. Yeah, like in this example, financial info, your location, etc. And then you can still decide if you actually want to download this application or not. There's also, especially in talks with universities, this is right now a very important topic, but also with analysts, to make these nutrition factors of privacy, try to simplify it, make it clear for everyone. So this is a big topic in the market right now. Another big topic is to inform the end user piece by piece, a little bit like contextual. This is an example. When I would like to find a specific store somewhere in the city, I potentially use Google Maps, like in this example. And when I want to use Google Maps, my data is flowing to Google Maps, so I have to accept the service to load, the service to fire, actually. And this, for me as an end user, it makes sense because I'm sharing my data, but I'm having a benefit out of it. And this is a whole user journey in the end that you can go through it, and potentially you will find more steps and more areas where you can inform the user throughout the user journey. And this is when we're talking about the trends of the end users. One is the simplification of privacy that we just discussed and showed examples for. And the to-dos for you would be to actually think about your website, think about your application, take the role of an end user and go through everything and check it out. Does it make sense? Do you feel informed? Do you feel trusted? And create a picture of your own privacy user privacy user experience in the end. Second point is the users actually claiming more and more rights. So we were, before this webinar, we were going through the activity reports of the Data Protection Authority, and also there we see growing numbers. So the claims of end users, they are increasing. They are more and more understanding that they have rights. They know where to ask you about it, etc. So the question or you to do here would be to check your privacy programs. Are they sufficient? Do they make sense again? Are you prepared when someone will actually complain about you? And what is your process on that? From here, I would like to talk a little bit about the big tech and the infrastructure providers perspective. Who is that? Who is actually owning the internet's infrastructure? And there are two to maybe three names that you see basically all the time. The biggest one for sure is Google. Google is having a majority, almost 70, above 70% of the mobile operating system is what they're actually owning. Apple is basically owning the rest, so 27, something like that, almost 30%. So whenever you're having an application, whenever you're working in mobile solutions, try to have a look what they are currently been up to. What are their trends? What are they doing currently? I will give you some examples on the next slide to that. When we're talking about browsers, then for sure Google Chrome is the player in the market. Besides that, there is a Safari. I think they're having around 10%. Microsoft is also having, together with their new browser Edge and Internet Explorer, together like 12%, so also quite big in the market. And when we are talking about what are they actually doing, one of the first things is what are they communicating? Because we are talking about the end user before and how you can create trust. And the case of Microsoft and Apple are very, very good from a communication perspective, because they are talking about the independency from regulation in the country. So privacy shouldn't be something for that is a privilege. For them, it's for everyone. And also, if you have a look about the words they're using control, transparency, the defense of data, which makes me, in a way, feel safe. So I want to buy that product. This is, again, when we were discussing at the very, very beginning of this webinar. This also goes into the direction of how can you create a competitive advantage out of privacy. Get the trusted end user. The other example is Apple. They're even talking about a fundamental human right for privacy. And then if we are talking about Google, so Google, since they're having so much power about the browsers, and they did one thing which everyone is currently talking about, which is they're discussing about the end of third-party cookies, which will be now in Q3 2024. So they delayed it, I think, twice. But right next to this, they were creating something which they called the Privacy Sandbox. And to create the Privacy Sandbox, they were actually going through all the use cases in the internet, and then they were thinking how we can recreate it with a privacy approach. You can again think a little bit back to our vision, how you can bring back privacy and the digital ecosystem together. And this is basically also what they did, and they tried it. So how can you still do tracking? So we're talking about grouping of data, cohort analysis, which data you're aggregating. So we're talking about first-party data, for example. And they created all of the use cases together and tried currently to create products out of it to simplify at least the market from a privacy perspective together with an ad tech perspective. But it's not that easy to other parties, which is one is the ad tech players. For them, currently there are questions like which solutions can be implemented into Google's and also Apple's infrastructure. Which solutions will the customer potentially use? Is it unified identifiers, cohorts, contextual advertising? What can we use? So there are many solutions out there which are still in an identification process, a development process. Also, the question behind it is, what will the regulator say? Can we actually do this? And then on the other side, there are the marketer, the ad tech professionals, the customers of all of the infrastructure here, so the advertisers and also the publishers. And for them, it's also hard because they have to identify the solutions, they have to test them and to evaluate them. Because we are talking about, or we at least mentioned it quickly, first-party data, for example, then what are the requirements to that? Yeah, do you fulfill as a company the requirements for that? Is a cohort analysis potentially something for you? So many questions that have to be tested and that will be tested. And this is also one of the big trends that we will see in 2023 is the testing and the development of more and more solutions for the end of third-party technologies. Another example is Apple, and they developed a variety of data protection features, which is, I'll make this quite quick, but especially interesting for a marketer, because they developed their ATT, App Transparency Tracking Framework for mobile. So tracking across apps is limited because they had an identifier, and the identifier cannot be shared right now anymore. If the user says, no, don't track me. That's one thing. So cross-app tracking is harder now. And mail tracking is also more difficult now because the tracking pixels, if you're using their own mail app from Apple instead of their iPhone, for example, then the tracking pixel is suppressed. And last but not least, also when you're using their maps instead of Google Maps, for example, the Apple Maps has a couple of privacy features. For example, random identifiers, or the other one is that they not really tell companies where you exactly are. So they do it a little bit in a fuzzy way and do vague specifications of actual user locations. And the question here is obviously, does that impact your business? For example, when you as a marketer, when you're planning a big mail tracking campaign right now for Apple users, then you should think twice. And this is basically what is meant by and try to understand the tech users and try to understand and the infrastructure providers before you're going into 2023 and potentially also the other years. So the trends for tech players, one is there will be more tested and evaluated alternatives in the market for the end of third-party cookies. What are your to-dos? Reevaluate your data strategy. Are you prepared for the end? And clarify which alternatives make sense for you. Another trend is, which goes also in the Apple direction, further privacy features from infrastructure providers. And your to-do would be check early if you're impacted by privacy features and how to potentially react. Could you or should you use a different channel? And the last driver in here is the regulatory perspective. And I want to give you this quote here: data protection laws around the world are complex and difficult to follow to a T. As a result, companies watch the courts and regulators closely to gauge expectations and risks. Now, that's all something that we see. Companies are waiting until something is actually happening, and sometimes this is about the regulators. When they are more active, we see also companies are using or implementing more privacy products. What I can tell you for 2023, that we potentially will see this trend increasing. So we will see an increasing number of fines. We already saw it in from 2021 to 2022, as you can see here. And also as told or as said before, there's an increasing number of complaints that we've seen in the current activity reports. You see here the CNIL from France, the Garante from Italy, the BFDI from Germany, but also the Spanish Data Protection Authority. They even had an increase of 35%. So the cases are going up very much. And with that, I would hand over to Ben, because he will give you a little bit more detail about what is happening with the regulators.
Thanks, Tilman. Yeah, look, it's a pleasure to talk a little bit more about specifically European regulation around privacy and data, and really the aspects which will affect us in this industry this year. I am going to apologize in advance for using way too many three-letter acronyms as well. It seems to be part of our industry, but I'd rather call it out to start with. So the first topic I wanted to pick out if we can have the next slide, Tom, thank you, is really talking about one of this very ongoing saga between IAB and the APD in Belgium. So that's the Belgian Data Protection Agency. So way back in March, APD made a ruling against the TCF. They highlighted a number of concerns, and as a result, IAB were required to pull together an action plan, and they did that in parallel to appealing against some of the concerns that had been raised. They took that appeal to the Belgian court, and that appeal was delayed twice, I think. And eventually, at least two of the important questions within that from that court were referred back up to the European Court of Justice, and to decide the outcome. Those particular questions were around whether the the transparency and consent string that's used to pass information about consent was personal data, and whether IAB, as the person who specified the structure of that string, was actually a data controller. So those two are still with the European Court to decide on the outcome, and that outcome's not expected until autumn of this year. And after that, the Belgian court can then make their decision. So potentially the result of this is a long way off. But in parallel, as you may have read in the last few weeks, APD have decided to validate IAB's action plan. So that action plan was written as a worst case, without the benefit of knowing whether any of those requirements would be overturned. This means the industry now has 6 months to implement a plan where potentially big chunks of it may not be necessary. So we've got until July. But there are positives to this too. So the fact that it's been validated, and we have a plan to keep the TCF legal, and it's on course to be recognised as a code of conduct. But there's a reality that parts of it potentially will have to be reversed once we get a decision from the European Court. If I move on, thank you. Moving on to another big European act that's sort of taken a lot of us along with it. Finally, we're looking at the Digital Services Act being enforced from the beginning of next year. So I guess this year is going to be focused quite heavily on preparation for that. I think one of the big aspects for the industry to come to terms with is this need for compliance with the regulation around disclosure of advertising. Specifically within the Act, two of the Articles 26 and 39 require any digital advert to disclose that, first of all, that it is an ad, second of all, that the identity of the advertiser, and if it's not the same, also whoever paid for the ad. And then the third part is really to disclose the parameters used to determine that you as a consumer should receive that ad, with how it's targeted, why it's targeted to you. And alongside that, if it's applicable, information about how you change those parameters. So how you can, for example, if you've given consent to an ad or to data being used, how you can revoke that consent. So interestingly, and I think usefully, IAB have already presented a very early draft proposal for a solution for how this information can be passed through OpenRTB bid responses, and to allow that information to be put into the creative payload so that the publisher can then kind of use that information in a way that suits them. It's an early draft and they're seeking industry feedback, so I would strongly recommend anyone with a view on this to get involved and have a look at the IAB Europe's websites. But it's great to know that this early on, with a year to go, we're already looking at solutions as an industry. That's a real positive. Next up, I wanted to talk a little bit, and I've kind of forced a three-letter acronym here just for consistency, really. Sorry. So I wanted to talk about the use, or rather the misuse, of first-party data. Already this year we've seen significant activity from the regulators on this, and obviously, given as Tom discussed, the sort of the market being forced to shift away from the use of third-party data in its traditional forms, this makes some of the new solutions that are being proposed kind of interesting. So again, they seem to be mentioned a lot in this, which is no big surprise. CNIL, the French Data Protection Authority, have been really actively pursuing tracking across first-party properties, and specifically for the purposes of advertising without explicit consent. If I pick out two examples, both from this month, they've issued a €3 million fine against mobile game developer Voodoo, and that's for using Apple's IDFV, so that's the ID for vendors, and that's just for tracking across their own apps, not any third-party tracking. So the IDFV is a first-party identifier, and despite Apple's efforts to prevent cross-pollination of data, the IDFV is provided to vendors like Voodoo to allow them to track first-party across their own applications. But it doesn't require an opt-in from the user. And CNIL have stated that obviously a data owner must have explicit consent to use any data at all for the purposes of advertising, regardless of the source. And then the other CNIL-related fine for this year is an €8 million fine levied against Apple. So Apple was ruled to be in breach of GDPR for tracking previous version of iOS, so iOS 14.6 users within its own Apple apps. So again, first-party apps without asking for consent. So CNIL deemed that the users had to perform quite a large number of actions to deactivate the ad targeting setting, and it was pre-checked. So you were automatically opted in. And I guess another interesting thing is this puts us all at risk to some extent, in as much as you can't rely on one particular country who govern GDPR for your enforcement. Apple are governed by Ireland. They're the supervisory authority for Apple in Europe for GDPR enforcement, but actually CNIL have relied on French data protection law to make this fine. And then I guess in sort of a related case, the German cartel office have stated that Google's use of first-party data for advertising is actually in violation of digital competition law. So this isn't about privacy, but it's also affecting the ability to use first-party data across different channels. So they said due to Google's access to data gathered from all its many services, they enjoyed a strategic advantage over other companies, and that Google doesn't have informed consent for how that data can, once it's collected, can be used by one service and used to build advertising profiles for use on other services. So there's a privacy aspect to it, but it is interesting. First-party data feels, or the ability to collect first-party data and use it isn't as easy as perhaps some of the bigger companies thought it might be. And then finally, I just wanted to cover a couple of current topics that are passing through the European councils at the moment, and these could well affect the industry, whether it's this year or next. There's been a lot of talk about the Data Act, or if you'd like, I'll give it its full name, which I think is Proposal for a Regulation of the European Parliament and the Council on Harmonised Rules on Fair Access to and Use of Data. So we'll call it the Data Act. And that moves it plenary for voting in mid-March. You will have seen potentially that last week IAB Europe and a number of other organizations co-signed a letter highlighting concerns about this draft, particularly that it imposes really severe restrictions on third parties for certain data processing activities, including the removal of all legal bases to process data involving profiling. So, that would mean really curtailing the use of any data by third parties, including perfectly legitimate partnerships between any two companies. And obviously it goes against everything that is currently established within GDPR. So obviously this letter recommends that the Data Act defer to GDPR for these situations. Another act worth keeping an eye on, is the political ads proposal, which is in plenary to be voted on this week. And there are some flaws with this. Particularly, it's very vague, and it could be applied to many kinds of advertising, or like issue-based advertising, not just specifically politically funded ads. It would potentially prohibit the use of lots of types of advertising, even sort of using consented data for advertising around the times of elections or referendums. So there's work to be done on this particular proposal as well. I'll hand back over to Paul and Tilman now. But thanks.
Thank you very much, Ben. So last but not least, it's my pleasure to talk about server-side tagging as a possible solution for the end of third-party cookies, and also some other issues that were mentioned already in the talk today. Could you put on the next slide, please? Yes. So as we heard today, the industry is changing quite a bit. We have multiple factors influencing data collection in general. Of course, we have the legal requirements, as Tilman explained. Consent is required, but also we have issues. A lot of us have issues with data transfer to unwanted third countries, like the US. We already heard about the Privacy Shield issue, or Schrems 2. But there are also a lot of technical restrictions. And one that was mentioned quite often today is the end of third-party cookies. Most importantly, due to browser restrictions that we already have today, like ITP. This is Safari's Intelligent Tracking Prevention, and ETP is Firefox Enhanced Tracking Prevention. Edge also has something similar, and then next year in Q3 2024, Google will also follow that direction, which is will have a huge impact on the industry. But today we also have ad blockers and privacy extensions, which can on websites make sure that any tracking scripts or tools are blocked, which can already impact the data collection today. Yes, the next one, please. A possible solution for all of these topics mentioned is server-side tagging. But let's have a look at how it works today in terms of client-side tagging. So on most websites, currently we have client-side tag manager implemented, and inside this tag manager, we have all of the different tracking tags implemented, like in this example, which shows Google Ads, Google Analytics, and so on. The CMP in this case, so the user-centric CMP, blocks or makes sure that these tags are blocked or fired based on the consent provided by the user. So there's a direct relation in terms of CMP and blocking on the website. The data currently is then collected in the tags on the website, and is directly sent to respective third-party platforms from the website. So everything happens happens inside the browser. This also means we have various different vendors or scripts directly on the website, and they do all the work. In this case, what should be mentioned is that cookies that are being used are like set by these tags directly implemented on the website, which means these cookies are heavily impacted by the browser restrictions like ITP and ETP and what else is there, by limiting the life of these cookies. Currently, for example, with ITP, these cookies can have a lifetime of only a week, or in other cases only 1 day. When looking at an example that a customer clicks on an ad, comes to the website, and then doesn't do a purchase right away, but maybe comes back a few days later and purchases whatever she came for, this user appears to be a completely new customer to the owner of the website, which makes it very difficult to understand how successful your ad campaign was, or any conversion tracking in general, which is a huge problem because it makes it difficult to understand how successful your ads were and so on. Server-side tagging, on the other hand, works differently. We now have a tagging server, which is in between the website and in between all the tracking providers like Google and so on. The tracking tags that we have that were directly implemented on the website before are now on the server. So it acts kind of like a proxy in between the two. The CMP in this context makes sure that it still collects consent as it was collected before, but the consent is forwarded with all the other data that's being collected on the website, like page views and so on, to the server, and is then respected on the server. And the huge benefit of server-side tagging is that now, since we own, the customer or the website owner owns this dedicated tagging server, you are in full control of what is being sent to then the third-party platforms like Google and so on. Yeah. So all the data from your website that's being collected on the website, together with the consent, is sent to the tagging server, and then on the tagging server you need to make sure, first of all, that you respect the consent of the user, but you can also do a lot of other things, like removing any PII, any personally identifiable information. You can enrich the data. You can make sure that the data quality is enhanced. So you are in full control of the data, and then once you are happy with the data, you can send it to all of the other third-party platforms that would have gotten the data directly from the website when it comes to client-side tagging. This also means that we need to have one script on the website, which is required to forwarding the data from the website. Yeah, so we, in most cases, will most likely still have a tag manager on the website directly, which then, for example, contains one tag. Looking at Google, it's Google Analytics 4. And this tag then forwards all the information, including the consent, to our tagging server. Yes. Let's look at some advantages of, one more click, please. Yes. Let's look at some advantages of server-side tagging. So a major advantage of server-side tagging is that we can adapt to privacy changes. And the most important part here is the discussed end of third-party cookies, and also all of the browser restrictions like ITP and ETP. This is especially the case because, as mentioned prior, as it is right now, most tags that are directly implemented on the website, they set cookies to identify users, for example. But these cookies set on the website directly are heavily impacted by ITP and ETP. When it comes to server-side tagging, the tags are not on the website directly anymore, but we can make sure that these cookies are set by the server. Yeah. So for these cookies set server-side, we have completely different lifetimes than this 1 week or this 1 day that we discussed earlier. They can be, for example, up to 2 years. They're not impacted by any browser restrictions or any upcoming browser restrictions. So we we make sure that we kind of circumvent these browser restrictions and get good data again. Another huge advantage is that we can prevent unwanted data transfer to third countries. Referring here again to Privacy Shield issue. Because since the server, and of course there are some, you need to make sure, for example, that the server is hosted in the EU, like maybe also in your country, then all of the data is being sent to your server, which is in your full control, and you can remove all of the PII before then sending the data to these third-party vendors. Yeah. So then you make sure that, for example, if data is being provided with companies that are sitting in the US, they don't receive any data, any PII that they shouldn't receive, which is a huge issue at the moment. Yes, and this is also the next example or the next advantage that we get increased control. As I mentioned, we can enrich data, you can remove data, you can make sure that you only share data to third parties that you really want to share. We gain a comprehensive view of customers across touchpoints. If we have one server and we send our data from all of different devices to the server, we can get a better overview of users and get good quality data. Another advantage is the improvement of website performance. As it is right now, you've seen an example before, when it comes to client-side tagging, we have a lot of different tags or also maybe scripts like tracking technologies implemented directly on the website. If the user opens the website, all of these technologies need to be loaded, which of course has an impact on the performance. Now with server-side tagging, we take most of these or all of these tracking technologies away from the website, and we have them on our server. So when the user loads the website, these technologies and scripts and so on don't need to be loaded. So this improves the performance. And last but not least, server-side tagging also provides possibilities to have cross-domain tracking without the use of third-party cookies or the local storage item. Most importantly, due to server-side set cookies, which helps us to gain back this powerful tool. But there are also some drawbacks that need to be kept in mind when talking about server-side tagging. First of all, since with server-side tagging, and especially talking about consent, we forward all of the data together with all of the consent to the server, and then need to make sure that the consent is respected and that we only provide data to then these third-party vendors with consent and so on. This is all happening on a server, and the end user can't see as you can do right now, if you're a bit techy, what really happens on the server. This happens away from the website. So currently, you could, for example, get some insights into what data is being collected on you. With server-side tagging, this is in the hands of the company hosting the server. And of course, a server costs money, and the setup is a bit more complex. So these are also some drawbacks of server-side tagging, that we have increased costs and we have increased complexity of the server, of the setup. But since this is still a quite new and young technology, this can also improve in the future. Yes, and when we talk about server-side tagging, we also should talk about the integration with user-centrics. And the integration with user-centrics into different tag management systems is already possible today. So this is what I showed earlier in the graphs. All of this, requesting consent on the website, forwarding the consent to the server side, and making sure that it's being respected is possible today. We have many customers using it already, and on our website we provide many different educational articles and guides, also on how to actually perform the implementation. But as I mentioned before, since the setup is a bit more complex than it is right now, we also have very skilled integration partners that we cooperate with, which can support you in setting up server-side tagging together with the user-centric CMP. So if you are interested in server-side tagging, feel free to reach out to our experts. You can find any contact information and all of the educational guides that I mentioned on our website. So feel free to go to our website and have a look yourself.
Thank you. All right. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you so much, Ben. Basically now it's on you. You just heard Paul. If you have more interest or you need more information on server-side tagging, which is a promising solution not just for the end of third-party technology, but also for many questions about Schrems 2 data transfer, etc. from a regulatory perspective, then don't hesitate to contact us. The other things that you've learned today, for sure, is regularly check what the drivers of the industry are up to. So now you have learned that the regulators are very interesting, what they are currently doing, what the big tech players are doing, what the infrastructure providers are doing, and also what the end users, but also partly the activists are currently doing. So stay very close to them. Then you have learned very good examples from Ben about what the DPAs are currently saying, what the EDPS is currently doing, etc., what the IIB is currently doing. So very important also here. And at the end, the server-side tagging solutions, where we also mentioned that if you have further questions, then contact us. So that's it from us. I would say thank you very much to the speakers. Thank you very much for the listeners, and stay active and stay updated, and have a nice day. Thank you.